I live in a small home in a fairly decent neighborhood, and I work from home too. My office is set up in a small room upstairs, with my desk right by a window that faces the front of the house. I loved having that window open for fresh air, especially as fall was just starting. The view was nice, and I'd keep it open pretty much all day. One regular weekday around noon, I was working like usual when I noticed something outside. There was a man standing at the bottom of my driveway. He wasn't walking past, tying his shoe, or doing anything normal. He was just standing there staring up at my house. I couldn't tell if he could see me through the window, but after just a few seconds of me looking at him, he walked away. It was weird, yeah, but I didn't know what to make of it. So I just kept working. I peeked out the window a few times after that, but didn't see anything else, so I didn't think too much of it. The next day, I was back to my usual routine, working, video calls, staying busy. During one of those calls, I spaced out for a second and glanced out the window, and there he was again. Same guy, same spot, standing at the end of my driveway and looking up at the house, just like before. Only this time it felt way creepier. Something about it hit me differently. It was eerie. Why the hell was he back? I must have stared at him too long because one of my coworkers on the video call noticed and asked if I was okay. I told them I was fine and tried to focus again, but I kept glancing back. He stood there for another minute or so, and then, just like that, he was gone again. I couldn't shake it. The whole rest of the day dragged on, and I couldn't stop thinking about that guy. After work, I went outside and walked around my driveway, trying to figure out what he could have been looking at. Everything looked normal, except I realized that from where he stood, he could see directly into my office window. So, yeah, he probably saw me staring back at him. Later that night, I was on the phone with my brother and told him about it. He agreed it was weird, but said it was probably nothing. I tried to distract myself by watching TV after we hung up. A couple of hours passed. It was around 9 p.m., and I had the volume turned down because I was getting sleepy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps outside. I froze. They walked up to my front door, stopped for a second, then walked away. I rushed over and looked through the peephole, just in time to see a figure walking down the street. Once they were gone, I opened the door, and there was a note taped to the back. It simply said, "Pat, answer the door." I was confused and terrified. How did they know my name? What did the note even mean? They hadn't even knocked or stayed long enough for me to answer the door. Not that I would have. That was enough for me to call the police. 2 officers came by and I told them everything. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. They took a report and told me to call again if anything else happened. Not exactly reassuring. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just laid there, heart pounding, thinking about that man and the creepy note. Then, just before 2 a.m., there was a knock at the front door. My entire body froze. The house was dead silent, which made the sound even worse. I listened, terrified, as they knocked again. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the line with the operator, the knocking continued. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just steady, unchanging, repeating over and over. The operator said officers were 2 minutes away, and then the knocking slowed. A 15-second pause, then 30, then it stopped. When the cops arrived, nobody was there. Again. I told them everything, and this time they took it a bit more seriously. They said they'd patrolled the area for a couple of weeks. Those weeks came and went. No sign of the man, no knocks, nothing. At least not that I noticed. It's been a few months now and still nothing. But it still haunts me. That note, that 2 a.m. knocking, the way he just stood there twice, staring up at my house. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, or if he's truly gone for good. But the thought of him possibly coming back, that terrifies me more than anything. This was when I was a freshman in high school. The town I lived in was small, and I guess you could say pretty old-fashioned compared to places nowadays. It was very woodsy all around, and the buildings and houses weren't so compacted together. My home was out in the woods. My parents had a decent amount of land, and my dad had built the place with his dad. Anyway, it didn't have a real road or a driveway, it was more of a dirt trail. So, the school buses didn't have a stop at our place. I'd either have to walk a mile to my friend's house to get picked up, or just walk the extra distance straight to school. Usually, I just walked all the way to school. This was a typical day as far as I could tell. I was walking down the trail from my home, enjoying the calm morning sounds of the woods, when I spotted a car up ahead. It wasn't my parents' car or anyone else's that I knew, and it was just parked right on the trail. This trail only led to and from our house, so someone being on it was unusual. I don't know if I'd ever seen a random car there before at all. I felt kind of uncomfortable having to pass it. There was a woman inside. She looked 35 or 40 with dark circles under her eyes and shaggy black hair. She glanced at me, but I just looked down. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked past, though. I picked up the pace and got to school. At the dinner table that night, I mentioned it to my parents, asking who it was and why they were there. Both of them looked worried and confused. They told me the woman must have just gotten lost and that I shouldn't worry about it, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They dropped me off at school for the next week, which was odd because they both started work early, like 6 a.m. So they must have called in late for the entire week just to drive me. Honestly, I thought it was an overreaction, as I felt I was old enough to handle myself, but I knew my parents were just being safe. On Monday morning of the following week, I packed up my book bag and started walking. During the last week that I'd been dropped off, we never saw the woman or the car again, so I really wasn't worried at all anymore. However, this time when I got to that same spot in the woods, she was there again, sitting in her car, watching me. I had a mini heart attack. This was too much to be a coincidence. Showing up twice on the trail that was basically our driveway, sitting in the same spot, and only appearing when I was walking alone. I made the decision to cut through the woods instead of walking past her again. I took a few steps off the trail, but immediately the woman noticed. She turned her car on and drove up closer to me. I pretended to ignore her, walking faster into the woods. I heard her car door open and her footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. But then she called out my name, like my full name, in this eerie, calm, almost loving voice. I turned my head and looked at her. She had this dead stare and a blank, expressionless face. Her eyes were tired and heavy, and she has this sickly look. I sprinted away, and after losing sight of her, I circled back through the woods to my house, where I called my parents. They called the police and came home right away. What I didn't expect was for my parents to know exactly who the woman was. It was my dad's ex-wife from almost 2 decades ago. Apparently, she'd had mental health issues for a while, and would have these horrifying episodes where she'd get obsessed with something or someone and do disturbing things. The day I told them I saw her, my parents reported it to the police, knowing it had to be her. The police failed to do anything about it, though, only checking up on her and saying she seemed normal. For that whole week, she had been stalking our house, knowing that every time my parents left for work early, it meant I would be walking alone to school. My parents never told me what happened to her after that, what she was trying to do to me, or why she was doing any of it. Hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. This was in 2019. I worked at a grocery store, usually closing shifts, and I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. We had a lot of regulars at our store, customers that would come in all the time and usually around the same time as well. One of these customers was a guy that came in right before closing a couple of times a week. Nobody knew his name, but everybody knew of him because nobody liked customers that came in 10 minutes before the store closed. Usually, being the only cashier, I'd be the one interacting with him. He was always a bit strange. He didn't talk much and always had a tired look on his face. This night, he came in as he always did, right before closing, grabbing a couple of things and coming up to the register. I scanned everything, he paid, and he left. We didn't exchange any words aside from a simple greeting. 10 minutes later, I closed down the register and spent a few minutes cleaning up, clocking out, and leaving at 10:15. As I walked out to my car, I noticed the man was still in the parking lot. He was standing awkwardly outside of his car, with his hands at his sides, just looking at the store. I got in my car and went home. I didn't have work the following day, so I stayed up a bit later than usual. I didn't get into bed until probably 1 a.m. Only moments after getting under the covers, though. A bright light glared into my bedroom through one of the windows. I thought it was a neighbor pulling in, so I didn't really care about it. After a second, the light shut off, which unconsciously confirmed for me that it was just headlights. I fell asleep only a couple of minutes later. I woke up in the night to what I thought was my phone ringing. The way I woke up, half asleep and in the middle of a dream, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I rubbed my eyes and tapped my phone on the nightstand. It was blank. No messages, no missed calls. Nothing had come in. I wasn't sure what to think. I was going to just ignore it and go back to sleep, as I wasn't even fully awake yet to begin with. But then the slightest thing caught my eye as I rolled back over. The bedroom door was barely cracked open, not even enough to let any light in or anything. It was just uneven with the door frame, not latched shut. I always closed the door to my room, so seeing it not fully shut immediately woke me up. I got out of bed and walked over, pushing it closed to see if maybe it was stuck for some reason. It smoothly latched into the door frame, just like it always did. So there was no way I'd mistakenly left it open. I felt my body get shaky. My heart was pounding. But even with everything pointing otherwise, I still tried to convince myself that this was somehow nothing. I tried to think of any possible way that this wasn't something to worry about, but my mind thought back to the light I saw before falling asleep. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a car parked in my driveway. I could only see the back half of it, but I instantly felt a rush of panic. Who was at my house? And was someone inside with me? I hurried over to the door again and flicked on the lights. I stood there by the door, panicking and thinking, realizing I should call 911 just to be safe. I looked at the nightstand that my phone was on, and just before I started to walk over there, I saw an eye looking back at me from a crack in the closet. My body shook and I let out a gasp, then spun around and sprinted out of my house. By the time I found a neighbor that would answer their door and call the police for me, at least 15 minutes had gone by already. The car in my driveway was still there when officers showed up, but the man was gone. It didn't take long for them to use the car to track him down, though, and I felt nauseous when it turned out to be the man from the grocery store. His reasonings for everything didn't make any sense, but it was clear he'd had his eye on me for a while now, and he was not meant to. I think the only reason I'd woken up that night was because the man's phone rang while he was hiding, and he silenced it just as I woke up. If not for that, I don't know what would have happened to me, or if I'd even be here right now.